What if, in the middle of a glittering charity gala filled with the wealthiest elite, a struggling single dad, quietly standing in the corner, suddenly finds himself at the center of attention? When a billionaire's daughter runs across the room, throws her arms around him and calls him Daddy, though they've never met before, a single moment, a mysterious connection, and a story about how kindness and unexpected love can rebuild even the most broken hearts. Stay with me as we unravel a heartfelt tale of second chances, healing, and the family we choose. If stories like this touch something deep inside you, stories about ordinary people, quiet miracles, and love that transforms, don't forget to subscribe and join me. There are many more inspiring journeys waiting just around the corner. Now, let's begin. Jack Mercer wiped the grease from his hands with a worn-out rag, the kind that had seen too many long days under too many hoods. The air inside the garage smelled like motor oil and old rubber, familiar and grounding. Outside, the town of Willow Creek moved at its usual quiet pace. Shops closing early, church bells chiming faintly in the distance, kids riding bicycles down cracked sidewalks. Life here was predictable, sometimes too predictable. He glanced at the clock, 6:45 p.m. Time to close up. Ellie, his 8-year-old daughter, would be waiting for him at home, likely nose-deep in one of her library books, wearing that focused expression he adored. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Ellie was his reason, his anchor in a life that hadn't always been kind. The bell above the garage door jingled. Jack turned to see a man in a sharp suit, clearly out of place among the oil stains and rusty parts. The man approached, a polite but distant smile on his face. "Mr. Mercer?" he asked. Jack nodded cautiously, folding the rag over his palm. "That's me." The man extended a sleek envelope. "I'm from Willow Creek Memorial Hospital. They asked me to deliver this to you personally." Jack took the envelope, feeling the heavy weight of thick cardstock inside. He raised an eyebrow. "What's this about?" "A small token of appreciation. You've generously fixed the hospital's vehicles free of charge over the past year. They're hosting a charity gala this Friday evening, and the board would be honored if you attended." Jack blinked, surprised. "A gala?" "Yes," the man replied smoothly. "Black tie, hors d'oeuvres, speeches, the works." Jack glanced down at his oil-streaked clothes, the calluses on his fingers, the faint ache in his lower back. A gala was the last place he belonged. But before he could politely decline, the man added, "It would mean a lot to the staff. And the children's ward remembers how you went out of your way when their transport broke down last winter." That memory tugged at him. He recalled the night vividly, frigid snow piling up on the roads, and the hospital van stranded. He'd gotten out of bed at midnight to fix it, knowing the kids needed it. "No thanks required." Jack nodded stiffly. "Tell them thanks for the invitation." The man smiled and turned to leave. The bell chimed again, and Jack was left standing with the envelope heavy in his hand. That night, after dinner, Jack sat at the kitchen table, the invitation unopened in front of him. Ellie was at the sink, carefully drying dishes, humming a tune she'd picked up at school. She glanced over and tilted her head. "What's that, Daddy?" Jack sighed, rubbing his temple. "Some fancy event the hospital's throwing. They want me to come." Ellie's eyes brightened. "A party? Are you going to go?" He shook his head. "Not really my scene, sweetheart." She frowned slightly, then dried her hands and came over to sit across from him. "But they invited you. That's nice, right?" Jack met her gaze, the same steady brown eyes as her mother's, and felt a twinge. Ellie had always been wise beyond her years, sensing things he never spoke aloud. How could he explain to her that rooms filled with silk dresses and polished shoes weren't built for men like him? Instead, he said softly, "People like me don't fit in places like that." Ellie reached out, her small fingers curling around his rough ones. "You fit wherever you're kind, Daddy." That's what Grandma used to say, her words settled over him, warm and disarming. For a moment Jack let himself imagine it, stepping into that glittering world if only to remind himself he belonged somewhere. Friday came faster than he expected. Jack stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the only suit he owned. A simple dark jacket, slightly too loose. A tie that hadn't seen daylight since Ellie's school recital 2 years ago. Ellie peeked in from the doorway, beaming. "You look like a movie star," Jack chuckled, "more like a mechanic trying to look decent." She tugged at his sleeve. "Can I braid your hair?" Jack laughed outright, ruffling her curls. "Not tonight, kiddo." As he grabbed his keys, Ellie surprised him by slipping something into his jacket pocket, a tiny, crumpled paper crane. "For luck," she whispered. Jack swallowed past the lump in his throat, giving her a quick hug. "Thanks, sweetheart. I'll be back before you know it." Willow Creek Memorial Hospital's ballroom was nothing like the garage. Glittering chandeliers, white linens, polished marble floors. Jack walked in, immediately aware of how out of place he felt. Men in tuxedos, women in gowns glided effortlessly from one conversation to the next, champagne flutes in hand. He stood near the back, nodding politely when hospital staff passed by, some offering genuine smiles, others barely noticing him. A waiter offered him wine. He declined. The speeches began, donors, board members, doctors. Jack listened with half an ear, fingers brushing against the paper crane Ellie had tucked in his pocket. Maybe he'd just quietly slip out after this. Then, movement caught his eye. A little girl, no more than 6, broke away from one of the tables near the front, weaving through the crowd. She wore a delicate white dress, curls bouncing as she scanned the room, seemingly searching. Jack watched curiously until, without warning, the girl's eyes locked onto him. Before he could react, she sprinted across the ballroom, past startled guests, and threw her small arms around his waist. "Daddy," she cried, her voice carrying clear and sharp in the stunned silence. The entire room froze. Jack stared down at her, completely at a loss. He had never seen this child before in his life. And yet, she clung to him as if she'd known him forever. The silence in the grand ballroom felt like a heavy fog, thick and lingering. Every eye was fixed on Jack Mercer and the little girl clinging tightly to his waist. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to lips. Even the music seemed to falter. Jack's heart pounded against his ribs. The girl's tiny hands grasped his jacket with surprising strength, her face buried against him, as though the world outside didn't exist. He gently placed his rough, calloused hands on her delicate shoulders, lowering himself to her level. "Hey, and there, sweetheart," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "I think maybe you've got the wrong person." The girl slowly looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and searching. "Daddy," she whispered again, as though pleading for him to remember. Jack's throat tightened. He didn't recognize her at all. This wasn't Ellie, nor any child he had ever met. Before he could say another word, a woman's sharp voice sliced through the air. Lila, a tall, elegant woman in a silver evening gown, wove swiftly through the crowd, her expression a mixture of panic and steel composure. The girl flinched but held onto Jack's sleeve. The woman stopped just a foot away, eyes flashing. "Lila, come here at once." Jack stood, feeling awkward and increasingly out of place. He gave the woman a polite, uncertain nod. "Ma'am, I think she might be—" But the woman, clearly used to controlling situations, reached for the girl without hesitation. "I'm so sorry," she said curtly to Jack, her voice smooth but cool. "My daughter has moments." Her grip on the girl's wrist was firm but not cruel. The little girl, Lila, he now knew, didn't resist but looked back at Jack as if she was being pulled away from something safe. Jack opened his mouth, unsure what to say. Should he explain? Offer reassurance? But the woman was already leading. Lila backed toward the front, where the wealthy guests resumed whispering behind their hands. Jack stood frozen, the weight of the encounter pressing on him. For a moment, he felt the distant, familiar ache, the ache of not belonging. The speeches resumed, though the room remained tinged with curiosity and tension. Jack remained near the back, every so often glancing at the table where Lila now sat quietly beside her mother. He noticed how the girl seemed withdrawn, folding her hands in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. He also noticed how her mother, regal, composed, kept glancing down at her daughter, something tight flickering in her jaw. Jack sighed, tugging slightly at his tie. This wasn't his world. The chandeliers, the designer suits, the calculated smiles, they all felt foreign. He felt the weight of grease-stained shirts and late rent bills heavy on his shoulders. He was about to slip out quietly when someone tapped him on the arm. It was Dr. Harold Bishop, the hospital's director, a round man in his 60s with kind eyes and a perpetual air of sincerity. Jack had met him once or twice while fixing hospital vans. "Jack Mercer," Dr. Bishop greeted warmly, his voice genuine. "I just wanted to thank you again for all you've done for the hospital. It's not often someone donates their time, so—" "Freely," Jack offered a modest smile. "It's nothing, just doing what I can," the doctor chuckled. "It's never nothing, especially in a town like Willow Creek. People notice when kindness shows up." He paused, then added more softly, "Quite the moment with Ms. Whitmore's daughter, wasn't it?" Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "Didn't expect that. Poor kid must have been confused." Dr. Bishop's expression grew thoughtful. "Lila's a special little girl, smart but quiet, been through a lot." Jack didn't press further, though curiosity tugged at him. There was something in the way the doctor spoke, a protective fondness, but also something unsaid. Before Jack could reply, the lights above flickered suddenly. Guests murmured, glancing upward. Dr. Bishop frowned. "Ah, must be the breaker again." He muttered, "Excuse me." Jack instinctively followed the doctor as he moved toward the side doors. Old habits died hard. He couldn't help but want to fix things. In the service hallway, a janitor fumbled with the breaker box. Jack stepped forward, offering a quick nod. "Mind if I take a look?" Within minutes, Jack had located the loose connection. He tightened it, tested the switch, and the lights in the ballroom steadied once more. Simple, familiar, the kind of problem he could actually solve. Dr. Bishop smiled. "You've got the touch, Mercer." Jack gave a half smile, wiping his hands on his jacket instinctively. "Just an old habit." As they re-entered the ballroom, Jack caught sight of Lila again. Her gaze flickered to him briefly, tentative, almost hopeful, before her mother spoke quietly to her, redirecting her attention. Jack exhaled slowly. Later that night, back home, Jack tucked Ellie into bed. She yawned, eyes heavy with sleep but curious. "How was the fancy party, Daddy?" Jack thought about the glittering lights, the whispered stares, the elegant woman whose daughter had looked at him like he was her entire world. "It was different," he said finally, brushing her hair back. "Some places feel shiny on the outside, but they're still full of people who need a little fixing." Ellie smiled sleepily, reaching for his hand. "Like cars?" Jack chuckled softly. "Exactly like cars." As she drifted off, Jack sat back, fingers absently rubbing the paper crane she had given him. His mind lingered not on the gala itself, but on the strange, fragile moment when a little girl he'd never met had called him Daddy, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He couldn't shake the feeling that the night had left something undone, something unfinished. The morning after the gala dawned over Willow Creek in soft hues of grey and gold. Jack Mercer stood at the counter of his modest kitchen, pouring himself a cup of black coffee, but his mind wasn't on the day ahead. It kept circling back to the little girl at the gala, the way she had looked at him, the desperate way she had called him Daddy in front of the entire room. He could still feel the press of her small arms around his waist. Ellie sat at the table, swinging her legs, munching on a slice of toast. She glanced up, studying his quiet expression. "You're thinking about last night," she said plainly, as only a child could. Jack gave a small shrug. "Guess I am." Ellie wiped crumbs from her lips. "Was it the girl?" His hand paused mid-lift. He looked at her carefully. "Yeah, the girl." Ellie nodded, as if understanding something unspoken. "She must have seen something good in you, Daddy." Jack offered her a faint smile, though the weight in his chest lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that last night's strange encounter hadn't ended yet. Later that day, while Jack was under the hood of an old Chevy pickup, he heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel outside the garage. Wiping his hands, he emerged to find a sleek black sedan parked out front, one of those expensive models that didn't belong anywhere near his shop. The driver stepped out first, a suited man with sharp eyes. He moved quickly to open the back door, and Jack's breath caught as Eleanor Whitmore herself stepped out, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. She approached, heels clicking against the rough ground, stopping a careful distance from him. "Mr. Mercer," she greeted, her tone polished but cool. Jack straightened, unsure how to bridge the canyon between her world and his. "Ma'am," he replied simply. Eleanor glanced briefly around the garage, her gaze lingering on the worn tools, the oil-stained floor, as if the setting itself made her uncomfortable. Then her eyes locked back onto his. "I thought it necessary." "We speak," she said without preamble. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, nodding. "About your daughter." Her lips tightened slightly. "Yes, Lila." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet hum of the town filling the silence between them. Jack waited. Eleanor exhaled, carefully measured. "Lila has difficulties connecting with people. She's bright, but withdrawn. What happened last night was unexpected." Jack kept his gaze steady. "She thought I was someone else." A shadow flickered across Eleanor's face, but she nodded. "Perhaps, but I'm curious, Mr. Mercer. Have you met my daughter before?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Never." She seemed to study him, as if trying to piece something together. Then, with a carefully composed smile, she added, "Regardless, I'd appreciate if you refrain from encouraging any familiarity should you cross paths again." The words landed heavier than she likely intended. Jack met her gaze evenly. "I didn't do anything to encourage her, ma'am. She came to me." Eleanor's jaw tensed slightly, but she said nothing. Before the conversation could stretch further, a soft voice called from inside the car. "Mommy." Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, and there in the open car door was Lila, small hands gripping the edge of the seat, her wide eyes fixed on Jack. No fear, no hesitation, just quiet recognition. For a fleeting moment, Jack's rough heart squeezed tight. Eleanor turned back to him, something unreadable passing through her features. "I won't take more of your time," she said, voice polite but distant. Jack inclined his head. "All right." She nodded once, then walked back to the car. As the door shut behind her, Lila's gaze lingered through the glass until the sedan eased down the road and disappeared. Jack stood there for a long moment, the echo of that little voice, Daddy, still ringing somewhere deep inside. That evening, as twilight settled over Willow Creek, Jack sat on the porch steps. Ellie curled beside him, sketching something in her notebook. "Daddy?" she asked quietly. "Yes, sweetheart? Is the girl okay?" Jack considered his answer. "I don't know. Maybe." Ellie chewed her pencil thoughtfully. She looked like she needed a friend. Jack glanced at his daughter, then out at the quiet street. A friend, maybe that's all it had been, but deep down something told him it wasn't the last time he'd see Lila Whitmore or her mother. The next day brought the answer sooner than expected. Jack was finishing up paperwork when a nurse from Willow Creek Memorial Hospital stopped by the garage. She handed him an envelope with a warm smile. Dr. Bishop asked me to give this to you. Jack frowned as he opened it. Inside was a formal note, an invitation. It wasn't another gala or fancy event. It was simpler, handwritten in a careful, friendly scrawl. Jack, we're organizing a small afternoon gathering at the children's ward. Some of the kids would love to see the man who fixes the vans and makes things work. It's nothing fancy. Thought you might come by. Harold. Jack's thumb brushed the paper slowly. Before he even fully processed why, something told him Eleanor and Lila would be there too. Willow Creek Memorial's children's ward had always carried a particular kind of hush, the sort of quiet that wasn't sterile, but careful. The walls were painted with cheerful murals of forests and friendly animals, yet the air held a heaviness. Jack Mercer understood far too well. He stood in the hallway, shifting awkwardly, feeling out of place despite the handwritten invitation folded neatly in his pocket. Part of him still wondered why he had come. But something, maybe the look in Lila's eyes, maybe Ellie's gentle nudge, had pulled him here. A voice broke his thoughts. Mr. Mercer. Jack turned to see Dr. Harold Bishop approaching, his smile warm and genuine as always. The doctor extended a hand, and Jack took it firmly. Glad you could make it, Bishop said, glancing around the ward. The kids have been excited. Not every day they meet a man who can fix anything. Jack chuckled softly. I'm better with engines than people, Doc. Bishop patted his shoulder. You might be surprised. Before Jack could reply, the doctor motioned down the hallway. They're in the rec room, and Ms. Whitmore is here too. Jack's chest tightened just slightly. He nodded, masking the flicker of tension. The rec room was bright, sunlight streaming through large windows. A few kids sat in small groups, some coloring, some quietly playing games. Nurses moved gently among them. Near one window stood Eleanor Whitmore, poised as ever, her silver-grey blouse crisp, her expression composed. Beside her sat Lila, legs swinging gently beneath her chair, a book open on her lap but untouched. Jack hesitated at the doorway. Then, as if sensing him, Lila's gaze lifted. Their eyes met. Her face didn't change, no wide smile or gasp, but something softened. The kind of recognition that spoke without words. Before he knew it, Jack found himself walking toward them. Eleanor turned, her face carefully neutral. Mr. Mercer, she greeted, polite but guarded. Ma'am, Jack replied simply, nodding at Lila. Hi there. Lila didn't speak, but slowly she slid off her chair and took a step toward him. Then another. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, crumpled piece of paper, a folded paper crane. She held it out to him silently. Jack's chest tightened. He knelt, taking the delicate shape gently from her hands. His rough fingers brushed against hers. Thank you, he murmured, voice soft. Eleanor watched. Something flickering across her face, something close to bewilderment, perhaps even unease. She makes them often, she said quietly, almost as if explaining herself. Folds them when she's unsettled. Jack glanced up, meeting her eyes. Seems like she gives them to people she trusts. Eleanor's lips pressed into a faint line, unreadable. Over the next hour, Jack stayed near the kids, showing a few of them simple tricks with old bolts and screws. How to piece parts together like puzzles. The children watched intently, their faces lighting up when he made a toy car roll with just a twist of his wrist. From across the room, Eleanor observed. She didn't participate, but her eyes rarely left Jack or Lila, who hovered closer and closer to where he worked. Eventually, Jack felt her approach. You're good with them, she said softly, folding her arms. Jack glanced sideways. Kids don't expect much. They just need someone to show up. There was no judgment in his tone, but he noticed the way Eleanor's shoulders tensed slightly, as though the words had landed somewhere deeper. She hesitated, then spoke quieter. Lila doesn't warm up easily. She's particular. Jack gave a small nod. Seems like she sees something familiar. Eleanor's gaze flickered toward Lila, who sat now beside Ellie at a table, both girls focused, intently on lining up crayons by color. "I don't know why she called you what she did," Eleanor admitted, voice taut but controlled. "I'm not sure she does either." Jack's eyes met hers. Maybe sometimes kids recognize kindness before adults do. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The soft hum of the room filled the silence. Then, as if catching herself, Eleanor straightened, smoothing invisible creases in her sleeve. "Thank you for coming today." Jack read the subtle dismissal. He nodded, standing back. But before he could leave, Lila's voice, small but steady, floated across the room. "Daddy." It wasn't a cry this time. Just a quiet murmur, almost questioning, almost hopeful. Eleanor's breath hitched audibly. Jack's heart clenched. Slowly, he crouched beside Lila, choosing his words carefully. "I'm Jack," he said gently. "But I can be your friend. Would that be okay?" Lila's blue eyes held his. She nodded. Eleanor stood motionless, her carefully constructed walls showing faint cracks. As Jack left the hospital that afternoon, the sunlight felt warmer on his shoulders. Something had shifted, small, almost imperceptible, but real. Maybe. It wasn't the last time he'd crossed paths with Eleanor Whitmore and her quiet daughter, and maybe, just maybe, some things didn't need fixing. They just needed a little patience. The following days unfolded with quiet regularity in Willow Creek, but for Jack Mercer, something had shifted beneath the routine. Each morning he opened the garage, checked engines, rotated tires, everything familiar. Yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the image of Lila Whitmore's small hand offering him a paper crane, nor the way she had softly murmured, "Daddy," with eyes full of something neither confusion nor fantasy, but recognition. Jack didn't pretend to understand it, but he knew one thing for certain. When a child reached out, you didn't turn away. It was Thursday afternoon when the unexpected happened. Jack was underneath a rusted Ford, wrench in hand, when he heard the crunch of tires again. The sound no mechanic ignores. He slid out from under the chassis, wiping his brow, only to see the sleek black sedan once more pulling into his lot. And stepping out, impeccably dressed, was Eleanor Whitmore. Jack stood slowly, brushing his hands on his coveralls. He half expected her to offer a terse nod, drop a polite request, and retreat quickly as she had before. But instead, Eleanor approached with an unfamiliar hesitance, her gloved hands folded together. "Mr. Mercer," she greeted, voice measured, but lacking its usual sharp edge. "Ma'am," Jack replied, squinting slightly in the afternoon sun. "Something I can help you with." She glanced briefly at the cars lined up behind him, then back at him directly. "I've been thinking," she began, as if the words tasted strange. "About Lila." Jack waited, letting her set the pace. "She's been quieter than usual," Eleanor continued, voice softer now. "Withdrawn, yes, but lately she's been folding cranes every evening and asking if she can see you." Jack felt something tighten in his chest, but he kept his tone steady. "Kids latch onto people. Sometimes it's not unusual." Eleanor's eyes flickered, something almost vulnerable flashing beneath the surface. "Perhaps, but I think she feels safe around you." There was a pause, something heavy lingering unsaid. Then, almost abruptly, Eleanor straightened, composing herself. "She mentioned you like fixing things." Jack gave a faint smile. "That's what I do." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "Would you be willing to teach her something simple in a controlled environment?" Jack blinked, surprised. "She doesn't engage much outside therapy sessions," Eleanor added quickly, almost defensively. "But if there's a chance she'll connect..." He held up a hand gently. "I'd be happy to, Mum. No charge." Her lips parted slightly, as if caught off guard by his immediate agreement. "You're sure?" she asked, tone softer now. Jack nodded. "Of course." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor gave the slightest incline of her head, turning toward the car. Jack watched her go, the sunlight catching in her carefully pinned hair, and wondered if he'd just witnessed the faintest crack in her steel composure. The following Saturday, Jack swept out the corner of the garage, clearing space for something he'd never imagined, setting up a small workbench, just low enough for a child. At exactly 2 o'clock, the black sedan rolled up. Eleanor stepped out first, followed by Lila, who clutched a small notebook to her chest. She wore a simple dress, her curls tucked behind one ear, eyes scanning the garage curiously. Jack approached, offering a nod. "Afternoon." Lila didn't speak, but when she caught sight of the small workbench, her gaze lit up just a little. Eleanor hovered nearby, watching closely, but not interfering. Jack knelt beside the bench, pulling out a handful of harmless parts. Nuts, bolts, old gears, a small screwdriver. "Thought maybe we could build something," he said casually, glancing at Lila. "How about a wind-up toy?" Lila's eyes widened faintly. She nodded once, gravely serious. Together, they started sorting pieces, Jack quietly explaining each part's purpose. He noticed how carefully Lila listened, her small fingers deft despite her silence. Occasionally, Eleanor's gaze flicked from her daughter to Jack, her posture slowly softening as she watched Lila's focus. At one point, Lila paused, lifting her eyes. "You make broken things better," she murmured softly. Jack's breath caught. He met her gaze evenly. "Sometimes all they need is a little time," he replied gently, "and someone willing to try." From the corner of his eye, he saw Eleanor's expression falter just for a heartbeat. They worked for nearly an hour, piecing together a small, crude, wind-up contraption. When it finally whirred forward on its own, Lila gave the faintest smile. Quick, fleeting, but unmistakable. Jack leaned back, wiping his hands. "That's yours to keep," he said, nodding at the little machine. Lila reached out, tracing its surface, then carefully placed it into her notebook. Eleanor approached slowly, her voice quieter than usual. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." Jack stood, dusting off his hands. "It's nothing," but before Eleanor could reply, Lila spoke, her voice deliberate. "Can I come again?" Jack's heart squeezed. He glanced at Eleanor, who hesitated. Then, after a moment, gave a small nod. "Of course," Jack said softly. "Any time." As the sedan pulled away, Jack stood in the quiet garage, watching the dust settle. It wasn't just nuts and bolts he'd been piecing together today. Something else had begun to take shape. Fragile, tentative, but real. The following week passed with a rhythm Jack hadn't expected. Every couple of days, Eleanor Whitmore's black sedan would pull up quietly outside the garage, always at the same hour. And each time, Lila would step out, her notebook clutched tightly, her eyes scanning for Jack even before Eleanor had fully exited the car. Jack welcomed them wordlessly, setting up simple projects for Lila. Nothing complicated, just enough to keep her hands busy and her mind engaged. It amazed him how quickly she absorbed every detail, how calm she seemed when focused on the task at hand. What surprised him more, though, was how often Eleanor stayed. At first, she'd linger near the doorway, arms crossed, watching with that familiar distance. But slowly, the lines around her eyes softened. She no longer checked her phone or stole glances at her watch. Instead, she started observing her daughter, noticing the concentration on Lila's face, the rare flickers of curiosity, even joy. Jack caught these moments, careful never to comment, never to intrude. But one afternoon, as the autumn sun dipped low and painted long shadows across the garage floor, Eleanor did something unexpected. She stayed after Lila had wandered off to show Ellie, the girls fast becoming inseparable. Her latest creation. Jack wiped his hands, glancing up as Eleanor approached hesitantly, the crisp lines of her blouse catching the fading light. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice quieter than usual. Jack offered a nod. "She's sharp." "Picks things up fast." Eleanor's gaze lingered on the table where bolts and gears lay scattered. "She never really connects with other children or adults." She paused, voice dipping. "Except you." Jack leaned back slightly, studying her carefully. "Sometimes kids don't need perfect people. They just need someone who shows up." Eleanor's lips curved faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. For a moment the garage hummed with the sound of distant traffic, the low whistle, of wind slipping through the open door. Then to his surprise, she spoke again. "My husband died when Lila was 2, she said softly, gaze fixed somewhere beyond him. "He was brilliant, ambitious, but always moving, always away." Jack didn't interrupt. "I spent years believing if I kept everything controlled, efficient, nothing else would fall apart," she continued, voice steady but tight. "And yet somehow I still ended up here, with a daughter who barely speaks and a life that feels like it's missing something." Her eyes flicked back to Jack, as if realizing she'd revealed more than intended. Jack held her gaze, then answered simply, "Control doesn't fix broken things, Eleanor. Patience does." Her name sounded softer from his lips. Eleanor's shoulders dropped slightly, the faintest crack appearing in her carefully composed exterior. She glanced away, clearing her throat. "Do you ever wonder," she murmured, "if kindness might be more exhausting than ambition?" Jack gave a small smile. "Only when you try to do both alone." That earned him the faintest huff of something like a laugh, though quickly stifled. Before either could say more, Ellie came bounding over, Lila trailing behind, both girls chattering excitedly about the wind-up toy they'd assembled. Eleanor watched them, something unreadable in her expression. Jack turned to her quietly. "You could stay for dinner if you'd like. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti." She looked at him sharply, almost startled, as if no one had invited her so casually in a long time. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, to Jack's surprise, she nodded once. That might be nice. Later, in Jack's small but cozy kitchen, the unlikely scene unfolded. Lila carefully helping Ellie set the table, Jack stirring sauce at the stove, and Eleanor perched stiffly at the edge of a chair, clearly unaccustomed to the relaxed, lived-in feel of a home like his. She glanced around, taking in the simple decor, the framed photo of Jack and Ellie on a fishing trip, the hand-drawn artwork pinned to the fridge. Jack served up plates without ceremony, sliding one in front of her. "Hope you're not expecting 4 courses." Eleanor looked down at the steaming plate of spaghetti, something flickering in her eyes. "This is perfect," she murmured, almost surprised at herself. Conversation flowed easily between the girls, their laughter filling the room. Jack noticed how Eleanor kept stealing glances at Lila, watching her daughter's face light up, seeing her relax in a way Jack suspected hadn't happened in years. After dinner, as the girls disappeared to Ellie's room, Eleanor lingered by the doorway, her hand tracing lightly over the back of a chair. Jack leaned against the counter, crossing his arms casually. "You're welcome any time, you know," he said quietly. Eleanor looked at him, something soft and uncertain in her eyes. "I don't..." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know how to be in this kind of life." Jack met her gaze evenly. "Maybe you don't have to know. Maybe you just show up." For a heartbeat, the tension between them felt fragile, almost delicate. Then, softly, Eleanor smiled. It had been over a week since Eleanor Whitmore sat at Jack Mercer's modest dinner table, quietly accepting a plate of spaghetti as though it were an unfamiliar luxury. And something had shifted since that night. Not in grand, sweeping gestures, But in the smallest, almost imperceptible ways, the black sedan still arrived at Jack's garage on schedule. But Eleanor no longer lingered near the door or watched from afar. Instead, she often stepped inside, leaning casually against the workbench, her sharp edges softening as she watched Jack guide Lila's small hands through another mechanical puzzle. Sometimes she even laughed, a short, unguarded sound that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. Today was one of those days. It was late afternoon when Jack wiped his hands clean and glanced toward the small table where Ellie and Lila sat cross-legged, a pile of crayons and paper between them. Lila, who weeks ago had barely uttered a word, was now pointing animatedly at a drawing, a simple picture of 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a tree. Ellie grinned. "That's me," she said, tapping one of the figures. "And that's you. Who's that?" Lila's finger hovered over the tallest figure. She looked up, her gaze flicking to Jack before quietly murmuring, "Daddy." Jack's chest tightened. Eleanor, who had been standing nearby, stiffened slightly, but she said nothing. Instead, she watched as Lila added one more figure, a woman with a triangle dress and curly hair. Ellie glanced at her curiously. "Is that your mom?" Lila nodded solemnly. Jack exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who seemed caught between emotion and uncertainty. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Looks like a good picture, girls." Lila looked up at him, her expression open, unguarded. "We're a team," she said simply. Jack smiled softly. "Yeah, we are." Later, as the girls disappeared into the yard to chase the late autumn sun, Eleanor lingered by the door, her arms folded but relaxed. Jack stood beside her, wiping grease from his fingers. "She's different here," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Lighter." Jack nodded. "She doesn't feel like she has to be perfect." Eleanor glanced sideways at him, a faint, wistful smile tugging at her lips. "I've spent so much of her life trying to shield her from everything." Jack studied her profile, the tight line of her jaw, the faint crease between her brows. "You've been holding the world together for her," he said gently. "Sometimes you just need someone to hold a little of it with you." Her eyes flicked toward him, guarded but softening. After a pause, she spoke carefully. "Lila's birthday is next week." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Big plans?" She exhaled, shaking her head. "Usually just the two of us, small, quiet." There was a beat of silence before she added, almost hesitantly, "But I think she might like it if you and Ellie came." Jack felt something warm settle in his chest. "We'd be honored." That Saturday, Jack found himself standing outside a grand house on the edge of town, Ellie's hand in his, both of them staring up at the sprawling estate that belonged to Eleanor Whitmore. It was the kind of place that didn't fit into Jack's world. Gates, manicured lawns, large glass windows reflecting the sky. But somehow, standing here now, it didn't feel as intimidating as it once might have. The door opened, and there was Lila, her curls bouncing, her face bright in a way that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with something simpler. Behind her, Eleanor appeared, not in her usual sharp suits, but a soft sweater and jeans. She looked almost ordinary, almost at ease. "Come in," she greeted, her voice carrying something warmer than politeness. Inside, the atmosphere was surprisingly relaxed. No grand decorations, no servers or formalities, just a simple cake, a table set for 4, and a few scattered presents. Lila led Ellie straight to the living room, leaving Jack and Eleanor in a moment of quiet. "You didn't have to invite us," Jack said softly. Eleanor glanced at him, something unreadable in her expression. "I wanted to." She hesitated, then added, her voice quieter. "Lila's been folding less cranes lately." Jack smiled gently. "Maybe she's starting to feel like things aren't so fragile anymore." Eleanor gave a soft, almost breathless laugh. "Maybe." After the cake, the girls ran outside to explore the garden, their laughter ringing through the autumn air. Jack found himself standing beside Eleanor near the window, watching them. "She's lucky to have you," Jack said quietly. Eleanor turned to him, eyes searching. "I don't know if I've done enough." He met her gaze steadily. "You've done everything you could." There was a pause, a charged, unspoken understanding passing between them. Then, without thinking, Eleanor asked, "Do you ever miss having someone to lean on?" Jack's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't shy away. "Every day." Their eyes held, neither moving, as if both realizing how unfamiliar yet comforting this moment felt. But before anything else could be said, Ellie's voice called from outside, breaking the spell. Jack smiled faintly, stepping back. "Guess the kids keep us grounded." Eleanor nodded, her smile soft, eyes lingering longer this time. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting the estate in golden light, Jack knew something had shifted again. Not a grand gesture, but a bridge quietly forming between two people who had spent too long standing alone. Monday morning arrived with a sharpness Jack hadn't expected. Autumn winds swept through Willow Creek, rattling signs, tugging at tree branches, unsettling, like something shifting beneath the surface. Jack was tightening lug nuts on an old pickup when he noticed the unusual number of glances thrown his way. Customers lingered longer, whispered just out of earshot. A few even stole glances toward his office window, then back down the street. He wiped his hands, squinting at the gathering tension in the air. It wasn't until Ellie burst through the garage doors after school, face flushed and eyes wide, that he learned why. "Daddy!" she panted, holding up a folded newspaper. "You're in here!" Jack took the paper from her, frowning. His heart dropped as his eyes landed on the headline, "Small-town mechanic caught in unexpected bond with billionaire heiress. What's the real story behind Whitmore's mysterious friend?" Below, it was a grainy photograph. Jack, standing outside. His garage, Lila beside him, her hand tucked quietly into his, Eleanor Whitmore visible in the background. Jack swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "Where'd you get this?" he asked gently. Though he already knew, Ellie shuffled nervously. "Some of the other kids at school. Their parents saw it. They're saying stuff." Jack folded the paper, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "It's nothing, sweetheart, just people talking." But his mind raced. Who had leaked the story? How had the press even caught wind of something so personal, so fragile? That afternoon, the answer came. A sleek black sedan pulled up outside, but there was no usual sense of quiet calm. Eleanor stepped out stiffly, sunglasses shielding her eyes, posture sharper than it had been in weeks. Jack wiped his hands, meeting her at the edge of the driveway. She didn't waste time. "Someone at the Gala," she said tersely, voice clipped. "Likely one of the donors. The media's been circling since Friday." Her eyes flicked to the folded paper Jack still held. "My office has been fielding calls all morning." Jack's jaw worked, but he stayed quiet. Eleanor's tone softened, but the steel remained. "They're speculating about us, about Lila." She hesitated, something close to guilt flickering in her expression. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she admitted, voice quieter now. "You've been kind, Jack, more than I ever expected, but—" She swallowed hard, the next words brittle. "This is my world." Jack felt the weight of it. The carefully curated life she lived, the expectations she bore. And now, his quiet, little garage, and Ellie's simple world had been dragged under a spotlight neither of them asked for. He nodded slowly. "I get it." But deep down, something twisted in his chest. Before he could say more, Eleanor added almost too carefully, "It might be best if we give things space." Jack met her eyes, seeing the flicker of something vulnerable beneath the control. But he knew better than to press. Instead, he nodded again. "Whatever's best for Lila." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without another word, Eleanor turned back to the car and drove away. That night, Jack sat on the porch steps, Ellie curled beside him, her head resting against his arm. "Is she not coming anymore?" Ellie asked softly. Jack stared out at the darkened street, feeling the ache settle deep in his bones. "I don't know," he admitted. Ellie was quiet for a long time, then whispered, "She seemed happy here." Jack swallowed past the lump in his throat. Sometimes grown-ups get scared of happy. Days passed, the garage felt quieter. Customers still came, but Jack caught more than a few sidelong glances, overheard murmurs he pretended not to notice. The paper's headline lingered longer than it should have in a small town like Willow Creek. He tried to push it aside. Focused on the work, on Ellie's school projects, on the rhythm that used to anchor him. But every afternoon, when the clock ticked past 2, his eyes flicked instinctively toward the road. And every day, the black sedan didn't appear. Friday morning brought another blow. The garage's landlord stopped by, a man Jack had dealt with for years, friendly enough but not immune to pressure. He shifted uncomfortably as he handed Jack an envelope. "Just thought you should know," the man said gruffly. "Some investors in town are sniffing around. There's talk of redevelopment. Might be hard to keep this place open much longer." Jack felt his stomach drop. He nodded, jaw tight. "Thanks for the heads up." That evening, after locking up, Jack drove Ellie out past the town limits toward the hills, where the lights faded and the sky stretched wide and dark. They parked by the old overlook, stars beginning to blink overhead. Ellie climbed up onto the hood of the truck, hugging her knees. "Is everything gonna change, Daddy?" Jack sat beside her, staring out at the horizon. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but not the things that matter." She looked at him, small and trusting. "Like us?" Jack smiled faintly, pulling her close. "Especially us." But deep down, something told him change had already begun. The Whitmore estate felt colder than usual. Eleanor stood in her home office, tall windows stretching to the ceiling, but the light outside seemed distant, dull. On the polished desk lay the morning's headlines, yet another article speculating about her personal life, about Lila, about the mechanic who somehow found his way into their world. She hadn't answered a single call all week. Investors, board members, even friends, all politely concerned, thinly veiling their curiosity with professional courtesy. She'd weathered worse storms, but this one gnawed at something deeper. Lila sat cross-legged by the fireplace, a paper crane half folded in her lap. Eleanor had noticed more cranes lately, more silence. The housekeeper entered quietly. "Miss Whitmore," she said gently, "Lila's asked about Mr. Mercer several times." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I know," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She stared at the crisp headlines again, at the polished image she'd spent years maintaining. The perfect CEO, the perfect daughter, the perfect protector, except now it felt hollow. Later that afternoon, Eleanor stood at Lila's bedroom door, watching her daughter carefully line up her paper cranes in rows along the windowsill. "Sweetheart," she said softly, stepping inside. "Can I sit?" Lila nodded, not looking up. Eleanor sank onto the bed, her heart heavy. "You miss him?" Lila's small fingers paused over the cranes. She gave the faintest nod. Eleanor swallowed hard. I thought I was keeping you safe, keeping us both safe." Lila finally looked up, her wide blue eyes too knowing for her age. "He made things better," she whispered. Eleanor felt something inside her fracture, quietly, painfully. She reached over, smoothing a curl behind Lila's ear. "I made a mistake," she admitted, voice breaking. "I pushed away something good because I was afraid." Lila blinked slowly. "Can we see him?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, we can." The next morning, Eleanor found herself driving through Willow Creek, the black sedan rolling past familiar storefronts, the garage she'd memorized the shape of. But when she pulled up, something felt off. The bay doors were shut. No sound of tools clinking. No sign of Jack. Her chest tightened as she stepped out, scanning the lot. A notice taped to the garage window caught her eye. Closed until further notice. Eleanor's heart sank. A voice from behind startled her. Looking for Jack? She turned. To see an older man approaching, a neighbor maybe, grease on his hands, a tired smile. He's been laying low, the man said, nodding toward the hills beyond town. Things got rough after that article. Garage is in trouble. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Do you know where he is? She asked, breath tight. The man shrugged. He likes to take his girl out past the overlook. Quiet up there. Eleanor thanked him, slipping back into the car, her hands trembling slightly on the wheel. The road out of town felt longer than she remembered, winding through golden fields and up toward the ridge. As the car crested the hill, she spotted it. Jack's old truck parked near the edge, its silhouette stark against the horizon. Her heart thudded as she pulled over, stepping out into the crisp afternoon air. There they were, Jack, sitting on the hood of the truck, Ellie beside him, both gazing out at the wide expanse of sky. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, uncertain how to bridge the distance she had created. But before she could speak, Jack glanced back, his eyes locking onto hers. For a beat, neither moved. Then quietly, he slid off the hood, Ellie following. Jack approached slowly, his face unreadable, though something softened in his gaze. Eleanor swallowed hard, her voice catching as she spoke. I shouldn't have left things the way I did. Jack said nothing, waiting. Eleanor forced herself to meet his eyes, no longer hiding. I thought I had to control everything. Protect Lila from the mess. But I forgot that sometimes protection feels like distance. Her voice faltered, but she pushed forward. She misses you. So do I. The words hung between them, fragile and raw. Jack's jaw worked silently before he spoke. We were doing just fine, Eleanor. You didn't have to fix it. Eleanor's eyes shimmered. Maybe I'm the one who needed fixing. Ellie tugged gently at Jack's sleeve, glancing up at him, then back at Eleanor. Slowly, Jack's shoulders eased. He glanced at his daughter, then back at Eleanor. We've still got some spaghetti left over, he said quietly. For the first time in days, Eleanor smiled, a real smile, tentative but honest. I'd like that, she whispered. Jack nodded, a small tilt of his head like an unspoken bridge finally rebuilt. Lila appeared at the edge of the hill, her small frame silhouetted against the sky. When she spotted Jack and Ellie, she broke into a run, curls flying, her arms wide. Daddy! She called, her voice clear, unburdened. Eleanor watched as Jack knelt to catch her, her heart filling with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Maybe this wasn't about perfect worlds or spotless reputations. Maybe it was about showing up, cracks and all. The days after that afternoon on the Overlook unfolded differently. It wasn't sudden, like a door flung open, but gradual, like sunlight slowly thawing something frozen for too long. For the first time in years, Eleanor Whitmore found herself navigating life without the armor she'd so carefully constructed. Jack didn't press her when she and Lila came by the garage again. He didn't need to. They fell back into the rhythm they'd built, but this time something unspoken had shifted. The tension, the distance, was gone. One crisp Saturday morning, Eleanor stood outside Jack's garage, watching as Lila and Ellie crouched beside an old wagon, giggling as they figured out how to oil its rusty wheels. She breathed in deeply, the scent of grease, wood, and autumn leaves filling the air. The scene was simple, unpolished, and it felt right. Jack emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. He gave her a small nod. One of those quiet acknowledgements that carried far more weight than words. Eleanor hesitated, then spoke softly. "Would you like to have dinner with us tonight?" Jack quirked a brow. "Your place?" She nodded. Lila asked. He offered the faintest smile. Can't say no to her. That evening, Eleanor found herself in unfamiliar territory, not because of her grand estate, but because of the easy laughter echoing through it. Jack sat at the kitchen island, helping Lila stir something in a large bowl, while Ellie danced. Around setting the table, no staff, no rigid formalities, just a father, his daughter, and two people learning to lean into a life less carefully controlled. Eleanor stood by the counter, unsure for a moment how she fit in. Then Jack glanced over, catching her watching. "You're allowed to sit down, you know," he teased gently. A glint in his eye, she rolled hers but smiled despite herself, settling into the chair across from him. Dinner was simple. Roast chicken, vegetables, and a cake Lila and Ellie had decorated together, slightly lopsided but perfect in its imperfection. Conversation flowed easily, laughter bubbling up naturally. Jack told stories about customers at the garage. Eleanor found herself laughing more freely than she had in years. Lila's smile lingered long after the dishes had been cleared away. Later, as the girls played in the living room, Eleanor walked Jack to the door. For a moment neither spoke. Then Jack glanced at her, voice low. "You've got a good thing here." She met his eyes, something stirring in her chest. "I think I was too busy trying to build a life," she murmured, "to realize it had been here all along." The words hung between them, heavier than they seemed. Jack shifted, clearing his throat. "You don't have to do it alone, Eleanor." Her breath caught. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't grand, but it was honest. She gave a small nod, her eyes warm. "I know." For once, she wasn't afraid to let it linger. Over the next week, Jack noticed how things slowly bled into each other, the lines between his world and Eleanor's fading. They took the girls to the county fair, watched Ellie teach Lila how to skip stones by the creek. They shared coffee after school pickups, no expectations, no pretenses. And with each day, Eleanor seemed lighter, shedding layers she'd worn for far too long. One afternoon, as Jack helped her carry a box of Lila's old toys down to the community center for donation, she paused on the front steps of her estate, glancing at him thoughtfully. "I used to think I needed to keep everything controlled," she admitted quietly. "The company, Lila's life, my own." Jack waited, letting her find her words. "But when things fell apart," she continued, voice softer now, "what scared me most wasn't losing control. It was realizing how empty that control felt." She glanced up, meeting his steady gaze. "You taught me something, Jack. That showing up matters more than holding it all together." Jack smiled faintly, brushing dust from his hands. "I just fix what's in front of me." She laughed, shaking her head. "You've done more than that." That evening, Jack sat on his porch. Ellie curled beside him, the quiet hum of Willow Creek settling around them. Ellie looked up, her eyes thoughtful. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart." She hesitated, then asked, "Are Miss Eleanor and Lila part of our family now?" Jack's chest tightened. He thought of Eleanor's smile, the way Lila's hand fit so easily in his. He gave a soft nod. "I think they are." Ellie beamed, resting her head against his arm. As the stars blinked to life above them, Jack realized something else. Family wasn't always about where you started. Sometimes it was about who stayed. Spring arrived quietly in Willow Creek, soft and unassuming, like a breath finally exhaled after a long, uncertain winter. Jack Mercer stood outside his garage, the afternoon sun casting gentle shadows across the pavement. The familiar scent of motor oil lingered in the air, but today there was something else, a sense of ease, of things finally settling where they belonged. The closed until further notice sign had been taken down weeks ago. With a little help from the community, And, quietly from Eleanor, the garage was back in business, steady as ever. But more than that, Jack felt something deeper had been repaired, something no wrench or tool could have fixed. He wiped his hands and looked up as a familiar black sedan pulled into the lot. Lila was the first to step out, her curls bouncing, a bright smile lighting her face. She ran straight toward Ellie, who had been chalking flowers on the sidewalk. Behind her, Eleanor emerged, no longer poised like a woman carrying the weight of expectation, but simply herself, relaxed, present, alive. Jack met her eyes across the lot, and she smiled, the kind that crinkled at the corners and carried something unspoken but certain. That evening, the four of them gathered at Jack's place for dinner, laughter spilling from the small kitchen as Ellie and Lila decorated. Cupcakes frosting smeared across their cheeks. Eleanor stood at the counter, drying dishes, her sleeves casually rolled up, something Jack never would have imagined months ago. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching the scene unfold with quiet contentment. "How's work?" he asked, voice light. Eleanor glanced at him, a soft smirk tugging at her lips. "Less interesting than this," he chuckled, shaking his head. "Can't argue with that." As dinner wound down, they all migrated to the porch, the warm breeze carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass. The girls sat cross-legged, sharing secrets only children seemed to understand, while Jack and Eleanor watched from the steps. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Eleanor broke the silence, her voice thoughtful. "It's funny," she murmured. "I spent so many years thinking family had to look a certain way, fit into neat, controlled lines." Jack glanced at her, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Turns out, life's messier than that." She nodded, eyes soft. "Turns out, messier feels a lot like real." He let her words settle, feeling the truth of them sink deep. A gentle quiet fell over them, filled only by the distant chirp of crickets and the low hum of the town winding down. After a while, Eleanor shifted slightly, her gaze on the girls. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "how we ended up here? Of all the people, all the places?" Jack thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not really." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "No?" He smiled faintly, looking out at the horizon. "Sometimes the best things aren't about how, just who." Her eyes shimmered, the weight of his words landing gently between them. Later, that night, after Eleanor and Lila had left, Jack tucked Ellie into bed. She yawned, curling beneath the quilt, her eyes heavy but thoughtful. "Daddy," she murmured. "Yeah, sweetheart." She paused, then smiled sleepily. "I think our family got bigger." Jack's heart swelled. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Yeah, I think so too." Weeks passed, the rhythm of their lives falling into something steady, something right. One Saturday, as summer crept near, Jack found himself walking with Eleanor and the girls along the town square, stopping by the farmer's market, greeting neighbors who now looked at them not with curiosity, but familiarity. At one booth, an older woman handed Lila a bundle of wildflowers. The little girl glanced up at Eleanor, then Jack, her smile bright and unburdened. "Let's give these to Daddy," she said softly, looking at Jack without hesitation. Eleanor met Jack's gaze, her expression open, raw, unguarded. He knelt, taking the flowers gently, feeling something indescribable settle in his chest. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud, but it was everything. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden light across Willow Creek, Jack stood on his porch, Eleanor beside him, the girls chasing fireflies across the yard. For a moment he let himself take it all in, the laughter, the warmth, the quiet strength of knowing he wasn't standing alone anymore. Eleanor slipped her hand into his, their fingers intertwining naturally. They didn't need to say anything. Some things didn't. require words. Family wasn't always about where you started. Sometimes it was about who chose to stay. And in that moment, beneath the soft glow of the setting sun, Jack knew he had everything he'd ever need. And now, I'd truly love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Was there a moment in this story that stayed with you? Feel free to share your thoughts down in the comments. I always enjoy reading your reflections and connecting with each of you. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about kindness, second chances, and the simple beauty of life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you feel like sharing it with a friend who might need a little inspiration today, I'd be so grateful. A gentle like also helps more people find these stories. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending your time here with me today. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in life's quiet miracles.